Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast. We have Samarth Mehta from Thoughtspark along with us again today for the fourth and final episode in our master series all about PIM MDM for B2Bs. That is PIM MDM, Product Information Management, and Master Data Management for B2Bs, those being manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors. We've covered some amazing ground in the prior three episodes with Sham as well as Samarth. And in this episode, what we're going to cover off and to put a big red bow around this entire massive topic of PIM MDM for B2B sellers, we're going to start talking finally about implementation. What does implementation of PIM MDM for manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors actually look like? What does adoption and change management look like after implementation? What are some of the post-go activities that you're going to need to do in the fast following set of responsibilities that you're going to have once you get live with this amazing piece of technology and new processes to go along with it? And then finally, we're going to cover off some of the reasons that PIM projects fail, plus some key mitigation strategies wrapped around that to hopefully help you have the highest chance of a very successful PIM MDM rollout within your B2B business. Anything you'd like to add, Samarth, before we kick off?
No, I think this is the perfect wrap up to the series. And I think there's a lot of key learnings coming up. So yeah, let's get straight into it.
Let's get stuck in. Cool. Okay, so when we're talking about implementation, oftentimes what I see as a real risk or one of the things about implementation that can catch B2B sellers by surprise is the fact that they will need to be part of the process. It's not like with PIM MDM, some other technology implementations, maybe ERP, you can hand that off to a consultant, let them do the implementation, and then they come back, they onboard you into the system, they train you, and then you're off to the races. This is very much, what I like to say is you learn by doing. And by being actually involved in the PIM MDM implementation process, you're also learning how to use the system at the exact same time. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is where, I think in the modern world, when you're doing implementations, first of all, I think with all these cloud-based products, it's become a lot more easier to do these implementations. So the time to delivery has become smaller, right? And it is also that these platforms are highly configurable and also self-serviceable. So there are certain aspects it's always good to understand and know along the way, because then you can easily also change some of these things while the team is working and give real-time feedback. But I think you absolutely nailed it that a lot of times people underestimate the effort that is needed on the customer's part to be part of it. And that is why I really always recommend to customers, you need to be a part of it throughout the implementation process, not just be in the design process. Okay, I gave a bunch of requirements, I saw the demo, and yeah, you guys go and do your thing and we'll see each other after 2 months, 3 months. No, because that always leads to disasters, right? The idea is that you're always building incrementally. All teams pretty much know to deliver in an agile way where they're always delivering small demos every 2 weeks. And you really need to be, as a customer, a part of the process, understand what's coming your way, how much the platform is progressing, and give feedback early in, right? Because traditionally, I remember 10 years ago when PIM implementations would take like an year, and we would go in and do demos like after 2 months, 3 months, and the customers would see this huge new system. And I think the world doesn't move as slow anymore, right? By that time, pretty much your entire implementation could be irrelevant. So it's very important to cover for this time, be a part of the process, and as the bills are coming in, to review this and also work closely with your implementation partner, right? This is where I'll probably also spend a couple of minutes just highlighting how important it is to have the right system integrator with you. Somebody who understands the platform, somebody who's been there, done that before. And the one thing that you have to really do is you have to trust the system integrator. This is a lot more about trust than about just technical know-hows. So this entire process is it's an engaging process. You have to work together, collaborate together, and trust the delivery partner to do the right thing and come to you.
I think we can also take a page out of the developer's playbook, right? In the development world, we have these two really important concepts that I think we can translate into the effort that a B2B brand or business needs to put into this project. So in the development world, you don't go away and develop for 6 months and then all of a sudden start your testing when you get into QA. No, there's two
Exactly.
concepts that are really important: unit testing and regression testing. Okay. Unit
Exactly.
testing is we have these discrete pieces of functionality. They're being delivered either through development or through configuration or customization of a given platform, like a PIM MDM platform. And we want to test each one of those smaller pieces of functionality in a discrete way so that we don't have a massive piece of rework to do in 3-4 months time. If we need to make a tiny tweak, it's better to make the tiny tweak now on that small piece of functionality upon which every other subsequent piece of functionality is built, because there's a downstream impact. If you go back and you make a change to a data dictionary, you go back and you make a major change to an attribute set, or you go back and you make a major change to your channel mappings, or you go back, every one of those significant changes will have a massive downstream impact on every other subsequently delivered piece of capability. And so by catching it early and saying, look, we need to make a minor tweak here because our business has changed or our product has changed, or this category needs a different set of attributes, or maybe there's a different single attribute within an array of attributes or something like that, or we have these aggregated attributes or these calculated attributes where we take an attribute from one field and an attribute from another field and we stick those together and we create a new final attribute out of that combination of data. And so what I'd like to say is that when we do these incremental testing processes internally, we're not only learning how to use the system, but we're also reviewing how the system works. And there's a difference between those two. And so by
Yeah.
doing those little incremental pieces of testing, then we can also do regression testing, meaning, okay, we've made this tiny little change to this new discrete piece of new functionality that we've just delivered to the business. Now let's look back at the previous pieces of functionality and see if it impacts any of those previous workflows or validation steps or something like that. So we can do regression testing at the same time we're doing unit testing, and that will give the seller who is implementing these systems confidence with each new, and it's a growing level of confidence, right? With each new piece of functionality that gets implemented and deployed.
Absolutely, and couldn't agree with you more on this. And also, I think from an implementation people point of view, right, a best practice in that sense is to make sure that you're discussing when you're doing demos, right. And I'm a techie myself, right. I've been a part of implementations where I used to code for a long time and do these implementation very hands-on. And we love all the complexities and all the technical nitty-gritties and doing some complex stuff. But I think especially when you're presenting these incremental builds, as we call them, it's very important to think about it from a business perspective, and you show it in the right business scenario, that where they fit in the grand scheme of things as you're piecing together this massive puzzle. Because what happens is that when you're sometimes thinking about it in a too technical way and you're like, oh, I'm going to present this data model with these attributes, it doesn't make sense to the business. And another best practice that we usually follow is that I would recommend to use real data, real customer data, real usernames, real things, because then people tend to relate to it a lot more than just doing it. So I think, yes, absolutely. Incremental builds tested out by the customer, but also built out for the business rather than just completing a technical set of tasks. Yeah.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, what the business owner or business leaders or subject matter experts inside the business need to do is they need to satisfy themselves through contextually relevant testing that this system is going to do what they expect it to do. It's not just a box ticking exercise by the vendor or the implementation partner to say, okay, cool, we've got these 56 things that are going to be delivered as part of our statement of work. Cool, I've ticked off 23 of those things. Cool, now I just have to do the rest, and then awesome, we can get paid. That's not really the point of being able to do those incremental reveals, incremental
Exactly.
rollouts, incremental testing. It's to give the seller confidence that the system is actually going to work how they in their head expected it to work over and above the line item list of requirements that were documented in a discovery that in many instances happened months or quarters beforehand.
Exactly. No, I totally agree there. So this is where, it's all a very collaborative process. Implementation is not just about a bunch of technology guys just going in and doing some plumbing and coming out with this magical solution. It really is about working together towards solving a real business problem and coming together to deliver an end-to-end solution, which actually will be accepted and adopted by the business.
And then one of the other things we talked about off air was the fact that as you're going through this process, now is the time with each incremental piece of functional testing. Now is the time to tweak the scope if necessary. So during that scope of implementation, it might be a 2-month, a 6-month, a 12-month implementation. Things will have changed in the business. Your product set may have changed. You may have added new categories of products. You may have added new SKUs. You may have added new attributes. You may have added new marketing collateral. You may have added new team members. You may have added new workflows. You may have added new validations. There may be things that have changed in the business, and now is the time to raise that as a change request, even if it takes a little bit more time, even if it takes a little bit more investment to get those changes integrated into your development. You're far better off to do it now than as a post-live standalone exercise and trying to change the wheels on the bus while it's going down the motorway at 100 kilometers an hour is very difficult. So now is the time. If you have business changes, business process changes, business data changes, now is the time to take those into account when you're actually doing that incremental testing and implementation.
Exactly. And honestly, as implementation guys, we really don't like them. We don't like the changes as much. But I think you're right. This is probably the last milestone during discovery and design. And also, I think giving it to customers, okay, in all honesty, if I'm in a customer's position, it's a difficult place to be. I'm buying a PIM software. I really have not, a lot of times it could be my first PIM software that's coming into the company. So I really don't know what to expect. And this is why in the implementation process, it's very important to pay attention to these demos and things that are being spoken about, because this is my right time to actually call out things or red flags or things that are not making sense to me, right? And understand them better. And this is very natural. And this can be frustrating for both the vendor as well as the customer, because the customer will be like, yeah, so wait, this is the first time I'm seeing this. Why don't you understand? I need changes, right? And then the vendor is going, but I squeezed everything in and I don't have any buffer for any more changes. And that's always a difficult position to be in. So, but this is absolutely the right time to call it out, agree on a plan to how to address it. And in all honesty, I think most vendors would keep a buffer for or anticipate these changes in real time. You're always keeping every sprint, you keep that 10-20% open to interpretation changes. And it is fair. I don't think it is unfair on either side. It's just that it's a very massive undertaking. And to expect everyone to have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's in discovery is just a very unreasonable expectation from
You're
the
setting
customer.
everybody up for failure if that's the expectation.
Exactly.
And that's why
So
sometimes when an implementation partner will put it in the initial SOW, sometimes they will actually put a line item in there, 20 to 30%, 15 to 30% of buffer for unknowns, undiscoverables, things like that, final tweaks. Sometimes the customer will say, no, remove that line. We've done discovery. You're supposed to be the experts. You're supposed to have uncovered everything. But I think in that scenario, then the implementation partner has to take a slightly different approach during implementation, where they stick to the scope, to the letter of the scope and the letter of the estimates per phase. And then
yes.
they have to come back and propose a formal change request for every little tiny tweak and scope change. And then the customer in that scenario can feel like they're being nickel and dimed to death because the partner was told, stick to this scope because this is the budget that we have, this is the timeline that we've set, and you have to hit it. So it's a catch-22, right? I would rather, in most instances, my implementation partners put in a reasonable buffer based on their experience of the previous 50 projects that they've done, knowing for a fact that there will be unknowns and undiscoverables that will come up during the implementation that will need to be addressed. So if there's one thing I would say is have an absolute expectation that a good partner will come back to you when they present to you the original statement of work, the original commercial proposal. They're probably going to have anywhere from a 15 to a 30% unknown buffer in there to cover contingencies, the contingencies that we've seen come and happen time and time again mid-project. So just budget for it in advance so that there are no surprises and nobody gets frustrated.
Exactly. And one other thing is maybe, and I've seen smart customers be the same way on their side when they're doing the budgeting, not to put all their eggs into the
One
basket straight
basket.
up, right? Yeah, you're like, okay, maybe I have a budget of 100,000. I'll just put it as, I'll scope it for 70,000. And I'll tell my business as well to scope it for 70,000 and make sure we are aligned on that. And you have a 30K to play around with when the time is right. But it's important to understand that this is a part of the process, not to be frustrated in either case by the vendor as well as by the customer, especially because for customers, like you said, it can be like, am I getting ripped off? And does this make sense? These are all natural insecurities for a customer to have. So it's totally fine to be a part of the process where change is a constant. And it's very important. This is where the trust is the most important aspect that you need to build with the system integrator as you're choosing the right partner for your implementation. It's important that you trust them to do the right thing. And then you come to a mutual agreement on a case-to-case basis.
Yeah, one other thing you raised, which I think is super important here, is to be very open to a change mindset and not to try to rebuild legacy systems. Now, what we mean by that is that every new system will have its quote unquote default ways of doing things. It will have some default out of the box processes. It will have some default out of the box workflows. It will have some default hierarchies of data. It will have some default ways of working. And if you as a business can adapt to those ways of working instead of forcing the system to adapt to you. Now, of course, there's always some compromise. There's certain things inside of a business that can't be changed. There's certain things inside of a business that are hard and fast rules. This is how we do it, and there's a very specific reason why we have to do it that way or have this step in the product development process or whatever it is, and therefore there's other systems that have maybe a dependency on data from the PIM, and it has to be structured in a certain way. I'm not necessarily saying change those things, but really analyze and interrogate whether those fixed systems and fixed processes need to stay the same in the new world. Because what I have found is that oftentimes by adopting some of the default ways of working in the new system, you will bring extreme efficiency to your business. And if you can adapt to that instead, oftentimes you will end up with a better process in the end, because obviously, as systems improve over many years, right? Most of these PIM MDM systems, these weren't developed yesterday. They were developed over 5, 10, 15 years. And so they have taken all the learning from the market, all the learning from the industry, and they have built in some very smart defaults in many instances that will work for a wide range of business partners. And so I think that, yes, there has to be compromise. Yes, there are some instances where you must do things a certain way, but I think the more flexible you can be to adapt to leveraging as much out of the box capability in the new system, the better off you will be.
Exactly. And then I think to add to that, right, platforms today are designed to be configurable to your business needs, right? And what I keep telling business is that a lot of times people come in with the mindset that, let's say, a very frequent comment that I get is, oh, it used to only take me like 2 minutes to do this in my old world, and now it takes me like 10 minutes. Okay. The only comment that I always remind them is that you've been doing this for 10 years. And you've forgotten the first day when that system came on board, or the first time you ever did that process, and you forgot how long and painful that was. And now all the shortcuts and all of the cool stuff to it, and now you know how to do it better because you're a more efficient person. It's not that the system is better, right? And the same thing I always tell customers when they're adopting a new system, you need to be open. You need to understand that it's going to take time for you to learn and become efficient, because it's like you have your own routine, the way you drive your car, your stuff, your Vietnam. The first time you're driving a car, you're going to drive slow, you're going to drive safe. But then as you get used to it, as you get more confident, you'll build out your own ways of driving and you drive much better. So I think that's the part that I feel. And also because of this mindset, right? A lot of times customers would force changes. Oh no, I need this screen to have this here. And a lot of platforms, while being very flexible and configurable, are not going to build your entire custom layouts to look exactly like what you had before. And if that's what you wanted, it doesn't make sense, to go to a new platform, right? It's like you're investing into a new platform, but you want it to look like exactly the old one. and it doesn't make sense. So that's where this is always a difficult conversation to have with customers. But I always tell them that be open to change. Let it. You're not rebuilding the same system. Otherwise, you're not going to get any better output. You're trying to build a better system than where you came from, and that's the overall goal or the agenda behind that comment.
And the final thing I'd say about this is nothing is set in stone. These new modern cloud native systems, they're reconfigurable, they're changeable, they're editable. And so the reality is, if let's say you deal with the system as launched, as built, as designed for 6 months post live, you get used to it, you do the workflows, you do the training, you get onboarded into the system, you really get familiar and comfortable with it, then you'll be in a much better position. After 6 months, you'll be in a much, much better position to give valuable feedback to your implementation partner and say, look, this is working really well, but here's 1 or 2 or 3 key areas that if we could update this, if we could tweak this just slightly in terms of maybe a workflow or a validation or a concatenation of some data, or if we could do some little minor tweaks, we could bring even more efficiency to the business. So I think starting off, using it as designed, and then making comments, keeping notes, tracking your change management in the business, and then coming back and maybe 3 months to 6 months later and saying, hey, look, we've been using this system. It's embedded in our processes. We've gotten it stable. It's working well, but we think these 2 or 3 minor changes will make us even more efficient and will make it even more useful to our business. Or we can expand it to do more things and more processes and own more things within the business once we've had a chance to experience its power. And I think making sure that the customer understands, hey, this is not set in stone. This is the start of your journey. It is not the end of your journey with the technology.
Exactly. Couldn't agree with you more. And I think you put it there beautifully, right? It's an evolving journey, and this is just the start, right? The first implementation is only getting you off the ground, and this is not the destination. You're definitely going to evolve over the years as your business changes, your system will change it, and really come out to be what you exactly want it to be.
Totally. All right. Now, the next thing that we wanted to talk about was that there's there's some fundamental challenges that you and I have encountered over and over again around adoption of the new technology and then the change management that gets wrapped around that. And there are multiple models where that we can take with the businesses that are implementing this technology to help ease the process of change management within the business and to ensure very high adoption of the technology so that you get good ROI out of this massive investment that we've made. One approach is the train the trainer approach, and then the other approach is training directly the end users. And those approaches are slightly different, right? So let's say you have a system administrator, right, who the master of product data, say, for example, within the business. Now, oftentimes, one of the best approaches could be we'll train that person, right? And that way there's a relatively minimal training cost because we're only training one person instead of 10. So we train the trainer. We train this master of data management so that they understand the whole system end to end and how it works. They're almost like the system administrator. And instead of them having to then from then forward have to do everything themselves and have to have the whole weight of the world on their shoulders, they can then train the individual team members that sit underneath them how to do their piece of the puzzle throughout this, for example, data enrichment process. What part of the stage gates, what part of the workflows will their staff be responsible for and be assigned to them when a new product enters the system, for example? The other approach is to say, okay, it's probably a pretty big lift for one person to be able to understand the entire system end to end. And so therefore, they might need to be in training for a month, say, for example. Whereas if we get all the people, the subject matter experts or the individual specialists of a specific piece of a product data workflow, and we get them all around the table at the same time, and we're training them together as a group, sometimes that can be the most efficient way. But so it really does depend on the team structure, on the client side, on the merchant side who's using these systems. It depends a little bit on what level of responsibility is being diffused down across the team, how granular that becomes, and how large the team size is. But obviously, if you've got one person that's in charge of all product management, then that can be the only person that you can train. But it really does depend, I think, on how the business learns best. And then you work back from that about how you're going to structure your training and onboarding.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about why PIM projects fail, but one of my point of views is that people underestimate the effort it takes to onboard folks to a new platform. Just imagine that you're an Android user, right? And you moved on to an iPhone. It does take a while to get your way around it. No matter how geeky you are, how good a technology person you are, it's going to take a while for you to adopt to a new ecosystem, a new platform, a new device. Training is one of the most fundamental things that I always recommend to customers to focus on. And like you said, the two approaches that we usually prefer is that in certain cases where the customers have their own change management team, and this is also one of the driving factors of how invested you're in change management. A lot of large organizations will already have a change management unit within their company that is responsible for, let's say, training all the people across all the platforms, whether it's an ERP, whether it's a and they're part of their HR processes where they define the modules for the roles, and they're responsible for creating user manuals, how to use a system whenever a new person's onboarded. They have maybe a learning platform where
Training
they go and view
videos,
some
etc.
training videos, user manuals. So these people, there's an entire unit. So there are certain organizations that are heavily invested in those units, right? And in those cases, we don't recommend, like, why would I, as an SI, go and train your end users? I would rather work with your change management system, team, define a certain set of business champions from business, as well as a couple of guys from the change management team. And they are the ones that get trained. And then it's up to them to build all the in-house material that can be then used to later train people in the future. And this has worked really well for us with large organization where, they have a constant onboarding, they have a constant churn of people. So they don't want to really invest into one person or a few people and then be stuck with it. They really invest into a change management process where it enables them to be more agnostic from the people.
And more
The other
self-sufficient,
model,
basically.
more self-sufficient. Exactly, exactly. But then there's the other kind of organizations where you have, let's say, smaller organizations that don't have necessarily this whole change management machine, and then they don't want to spend too much time and effort hiring somebody specially to do this, because if then they're dependent on that person. And instead they could just collaborate with the SI and say, hey, you know what, yeah, Thoughtspark or somewhere else, can you come in and just train our guys? And happy to do
Do
that,
some
right? And you can
workshops, do
record it.
4 or 5
Exactly. Just
structured workshops. We'll record the sessions anyway so that we can reuse the collateral. We'll basically use this one-time training session or these series of training sessions as the collateral creation process
exactly.
so that we have the videos that then we can replay to any new person that comes on board.
Exactly. And it can be as simple as that, like I said, and as complicated as like loading stuff into a learning platform, figuring it out. But in the end, the fundamental principle is that you do not underestimate people getting trained, right? Because you don't want to be in a position where you're just, okay, you have this new system and then people don't know how to even use it. And you just throw them into UATs or testing and you put them to test with data. And they're always going to constantly struggle, right? And that's one of the biggest part, which I always emphasize on in every implementation, is to invest a couple of weeks of time where even the technology team is not focused on just delivering implementation and all that. They're actually for once working with business and trying to get them to understand the system, play around, get warmed up, and then go into QA or testing, because then it becomes really easy and efficient for everybody to approve what they're doing.
Man, I could not agree more. I have seen very rarely will a brand who is adopting these new technologies be willing to stomach taking a break from the implementation and go live to do training. But, and so 99% of the time, the training is post go live. Like it's literally, okay, we've launched and now we're going to do training, right? But it's very difficult to do effective UAT, which is user acceptance testing. It's very difficult to do an effective job of UAT if you don't know how to use the system. So my advice is always plan effectively a break in the project. Okay, we've done 95% of the delivery. The functionality is ready to go. We have that all set up in a sandbox environment that's maybe connected to a sandbox ERP environment or a sandbox PLM environment or something like that. It's feeding data into our PIM system in real time. We're able to enrich products. If we can carve out a 1 to 2 week period dedicated to training before going into UAT, then that means that when the customer starts to build out their testing process, they're actually going to know how to do it. They're going to know how to set up the test protocols. They're going to have to know how to set up the test use cases. And then they're going to be able to know how to actually do those tests in the system in real time. Without that, it becomes really, what I see is when that doesn't happen, then the customer will rely on the implementation partner or the SI to develop the testing protocol for them and the test program for them, and then hand it over to them and say, okay, go through this test checklist. Now, first of all, that's great. That's all fine and good that you have a partner that can help you design a test protocol, because of course they're doing their own QA, and so it's an extension of QA to be able to develop that and deliver that to the customer as a UAT test process. But how is the customer ever going to satisfy themselves that the system is going to work as they expect it to unless they are the ones that develop the test protocol? And they can't do that if they don't know how to use the system.
Exactly. And just to add, one point is that if, let's say, for an example, you're thinking that this 1 week is going to change the cost of implementation and is going to drive up the cost of implementation, my point of view on this is that an unproductive team or an untrained team is going to cost you a lot more post go live, is going to delay your UAT by weeks, because otherwise your business is going to use the first week of the UAT as just a testing playground. They're just going to play around, do some dumb testing, try to figure out and just learn the system. So you're anyways going to lose all of that time and energy. And why not just invest in that 1 extra week in the middle, plug that, like you said, between development complete and just before going into a UAT? That's probably the sweet spot to put it in. And I think this 1 week will tremendously drive your ROI in the right direction.
And I think you are going to get so much more positive buy-in from your team. The team is just going to feel better. They're going to be happier. They're going to be more, they're going to get more fulfillment out of their job, out of their role, out of the project. They're going to get more fulfillment out of the technology if you train them appropriately. It blows my mind how some brands, they'll spend $1, $2, $3, $400,000 on a new piece of technology like a PIM system. They'll spend 9 to 12 months doing the implementation, and they'll have that road mapped in. But then they cut corners on the training and adoption side. And it, to me, it feels like an absolute lost opportunity to help ensure that you actually get the best possible value out of this implementation possible. And it feels like you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if you don't allocate proper training time to this new system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally agree.
All right. Look, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was that there are some key post-go live activities. Even if you've done good training, even if you've done good change management, even if you've done good system integration, even if you've adopted most of the workflows that are natively in the platform itself, there's a few key post-go live steps that you can take that can actually help to ensure long-term return on investment and long-term value creation for the business. First one is a key data governance strategy for ongoing maintenance of the system. Anything to do with data is not a fire and forget activity, right? The data in the system is perpetually growing. From the second you go live, the amount of data in the system is going to be increasing, not decreasing. The variety of it in the system is going to be increasing, not decreasing. The number of people that are going to be assigned to these roles is probably going to be increasing, not decreasing. And so there's an ever-increasing complexity scenario evolving around data and the governance thereof. And if you truly want to treat data as an asset in your business, this cannot be a fire and forget project.
I totally agree. Over here, a couple of things. That what happens is that, let's say you've gone live, right? And you've realized that your data needs are changing pretty much like, and in this evolving world, it's pretty much changing every week or every month, right? Let's say your business decides to launch a new category of products. Let's say you decide to acquire a company, which is not very weird now. You're like, okay, you decided to maybe split your business into two different companies so that you could get better things. You wanted to relaunch some of your products as a different brand, right? Now, all of this, what it means is restructuring your data on a constant basis, right? And what this will mean is you're consistently adding categories, changing fields,
New markets, new
creating new.
context, new channels, new languages, new everything,
Exactly.
new localizations, new
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly. And now you're thinking about this, right? And let's say you're entering a new market. Oh, let's say I'm entering Asia and you need this entire four new languages to be added, new translations to be added, add all the localized information. And what you really need is at the heart of it, you need somebody who's actually governing your PIM platform and defining what the fields that are in there and what they mean. And it's the gatekeeper of how you change or modify your PIM. That's something that, you could call that person a product owner, a data governor, or whatever you want to give that title. But in my opinion, the true job is to ensure that you're the gatekeeper of good quality data, right? You
Data
have somebody in
integrity
the
is the
organization.
term I.
Exactly. You have the one person who is responsible for the integrity of their data, and it's their business KPI, or it's what their salary depends on, their next year's performance review depends on, is to ensure that the PIM remains really clean, has good data, continues to have good data, and is responsible for any data, metadata changes, adding fields, any category changes, any kind of data corrections. That person should be a sole approver of this activity. So that's why I think it is extremely important to invest into this. And it doesn't matter how big an organization you are. Let's say you have 5 PIM users, it could be one of your PIM user who's responsible for this. If you are a massive organization, have 100 PIM user, define a separate team that's responsible for this. Carve out maybe champions from a couple of somebody, one from IT and one from business, that becomes the gatekeeper for this. And you have a lot of tools as well. If you're a complex organization, you have from Microsoft Purview to Calibra to a lot of data governance tools that can help you to manage this also in an automated way. But you need to be of a certain scale to make sense of that. But the point being, data governance is at the heart of the PIM implementation. If you cut corners on this, you don't think about how I'm going to do that, it is going to drive you. It's not going to drive the ROI out of this. And you're pretty much going to end up where you started. You're going to end up with bad data eventually. And then you're going to think, okay, why did I waste all my time on this?
I think one of the areas where I see skipped the worst in this regard is data deprecation, disablement, and deletion. That is the one step that I see, even in well-run data organizations with good data governance practices. One of the steps that is not talked about enough is actually removal of data from the system, or at least disabling data from the system. Disabling attributes that are no longer used or necessary, disabling categories that are no longer used or necessary, disabling products that are no longer used or necessary, deleting images or media that are no longer used or necessary, or are out of date and are no longer relevant to that product. We need to deprecate some images or some media, and we need to replace it with new relevant media. Or what we call succession planning of products within and so we can link an old product SKU to a new product SKU where it's been deprecated, it's been replaced by this new SKU, but we don't need to access the old SKU's data anymore. We only need to know, okay, the old SKU this is the new replacement SKU, right? So I think good data governance also requires good data cleansing and routine scheduled operational data reviews at a bare minimum once a quarter, like absolutely bare minimum, ideally once a month, but as a bare minimum once a quarter. We need to be taking a really hard look at our data sets and saying, do these need to still be in our system? And if not, let's put in place a process to delete these out of the system once and for all, or at least to archive the data off, get it out of the system, maybe get it into an archive drive somewhere that we can bring it in if absolutely necessary, but it does not need to be an active data set in our system. Because what I see when I go in and I'm doing consulting around PIM is we have data that is collected crust over a decade, and we have never deprecated any data. And so even the foundational data that we're bringing into a new PIM system, half of it doesn't even need to be there in the first place because we do not have good data governance.
Exactly. And I totally agree with you that, because I think it's a huge challenge. Jason, what I feel is as an organization gets older, people leave, new people come in, and then the monkey's on the back of the person who's now at it, right? And he's like, okay, why would I take authority for all the data that's been there before? And what if by God, God forgive if somebody needs it 2 years down the line and I'm the guy who deleted it. Okay, I don't want my job to be on the line. So I think it's a thing which I feel people, and somehow I feel that's a misinterpretation of what you really need to do. You don't necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean you delete stuff or you get rid of it forever. It just means that you hide it out of sight so that you can actually focus on what's important, and you can define different strategies to get it to a point of archival where you make sure you go through a good checklist of people that make sure they've looked at it, everybody agrees, and as a collective process you decide, okay, this data is no longer relevant and we can purge it at some point for good, right? Because you're right, in this time and age where data is going to be the point for decision making for, let's say, AI and all of those things, you want to limit it to the right kind of data and the good quality data, right? And if you're going to hang on to all these old artifacts or old inactive SKUs just because I have the, somebody may need them 10 years down the line for some audit thing, it doesn't make sense, right? So absolutely, I think it's also a mindset change, like we said, but a lot of things in life are just about mindset, where you need to come out with that it's not going to really be a big risk if I agree and follow a right process and get everybody on the protocol. Then it becomes an ongoing exercise to clean on a regular basis.
And I think there's a distinction that I like to help my clients to make between passive data governance and active data governance. Okay. I put into the bucket of passive data governance any of the workflow rules that you've set up to be in the system and they run all the time. So, for example, we might say, okay, there's 5 attributes that we have to have against a product before we will ever put it into an e-commerce system or into a sales channel or something like that. And those rules just run on a specific field set or on a workflow, and those just run all the time. These are the passive governance that just happens as part of the way the system operates. When I say active data governance, that's those like maybe quarterly reviews that require a human being to go in there, look at things, take a rational approach to it and say, do we still even need this step in the workflow? Do we even need this field? Do we even need this attribute? Do we need this array? Do we need this categorization? So there's active and passive. And I think that the passive piece is something that the system can provide once it's set up and it's configured. But the active governance is the stuff that takes a human being with rational thought and deep business understanding and a vision for the future of data governance in the business. It's that review that will make changes to the passive data governance that should be built into every workflow in the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. And honestly, this is where I would like to plug in one more thing, which is maybe a little bit on the side, where we at Thoughtspark are actually focused on another side of the business where we're trying to work out on AI-based harmonization of data, where you're working on profiling, defining, identifying these rules, and this actively identifying the challenges in your data and kind of building strategies towards cleaning and making it better. Because that's what we realized with the onset of AI. I think bringing data up to consistent and accurate form is going to be one of the biggest challenge in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think absolutely you've hit the nail in the head with that it has to be actively done on a regular basis and keep pushing the threshold higher and higher.
I couldn't agree more. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the areas or way in which we have seen PIM projects fail over the years of us working in this space, plus some key mitigation strategies to help prevent project failure, and more importantly, to help prevent project fatigue. Because what I see in my experience is that project fatigue prefaces project failure. Once people get, if they're seeing no progress, if they feel like we're stuck in quicksand, if no hard decisions are being made, if we're not getting properly trained, if we're not setting the foundation right with the scope of work being complete enough, if we haven't budgeted enough, if we don't have a big enough team, these are all things that can lead to very rapid project burnout. And project fatigue is the first step in project failure. Because I tell you, when the team is no longer bought in, when they no longer have confidence in the project, when they never think it's actually going to see the light of day, they think it's never going to get live, or they think it's not going to actually make their life any better once it does get live, then you are likely to get project failure. Would you agree with that? That's a red flag.
I totally agree. And honestly speaking, unfortunately, or I would say that we've all learned through experiences in life, and there have been situations, maybe matters are not in your own control, where you end up in such positions. But it's always important to retrospect and identify these things where the things can lead to a challenge. And And like you said, fatigue is also probably a too late a sign to know that, okay, because by that time the customers probably made up their mind, okay, I can't go through with this shit. And then, pardon me,
I'm going to pull the pin now.
language they yeah, and I'm going to pull the pin round. And honestly, and remember, it's even harder for the customer. It's so frustrating that you spent all the time going through RFPs, going through a full process of selection, and then you picked a partner, you picked a product, they came in, they worked for 6 months, you invested time, energy, and then you go into this whole thing, and then now you are at a point where you don't see the end. It's absolutely frustrating for a customer. I can imagine why they may be feeling that way. And this is why it's extremely important to understand some of the key reasons why this happens, and how you could avoid it. I'll start from, probably I'll also go phase wise over here, where we'll start pretty much from your defining the scope of work and doing an SOW. A lot of times vendors, in order to be competitive, and also the customers, in order to get a better quote, I'm not, and this could be either ways, where you could either underplay the requirements that you feel, and you, sometimes as a customer, you may feel we're not that complex as a business. We're not. We're pretty simple. How
Easy.
hard can it be? Very easy. Why are you coming in and saying all of these things that don't make sense, right? And then you're like, okay, so then that what happens is that a lot of times the partner would also probably, in order to be competitive, you could be underbidding, you could be underestimating the effort, and
you could be trying to de-scope key functionality that the customer actually needs.
Exactly. And sometimes a lot of these things get out in fine prints, right? Where we're in some assumption, in some part of a document it's written, and you're all under assumptions that something. So it is extremely important to align on the scope of work and estimate for the project to be right. In all honesty, this platform that you're purchasing is going to be easily, a PIM has a life of 5 to 7 years, right? So when you're bringing it into your system, into your company, do not look at it as a one-time investment or a small investment. You need to budget it in the long run to start, and which is where it's totally okay, right? Sometimes the simple mitigation thing is, don't do everything in one go. Do it in the right phases, build it out incrementally, so that gives you confidence. You have value immediately in 3 to 4 months, and then you go build out more stuff, onboard probably parts of categories, onboard different channels at a different time. Maybe you onboard one market and then you go to another market, right? So you need to build out strategies to do this in the right way, roll it out in phases, and slice the pie in the right way. If you try to do all of these too much at one go, and then plus you try to, let's say, undercut on the effort or on the estimate or on the budget, you are going to, then you're pretty much right just before even your first discovery session has happened.
You've guaranteed
pretty much set yourself
out of
up
the
for
gate.
failure. Exactly. So that's some of the things to watch out in the design, in the SOW phase or the pre-sales phase. But now let's say you're in design. And again, pretty much the same thought process, where, what we spoke about earlier, right? This is not your platform that you're going to try to build this exact same thing in the right way. Have an open mindset, define towards change. But one of the two things that I usually recommend to start extremely early, first is start thinking about data migration. Where is your data right now? How? Because you're coming in from a place where it could be on somebody's laptop in an Excel, and some other data could be on some network drive somewhere, and all these teams have it. And just to collate all of that and get it into one chunk which can be loaded into the PIM can be a huge challenge. So as a part of the discovery phase, the way I usually like to conclude is that we focus on data model governance, but migration is one huge discussion. Do not underestimate that. So I've seen that in discovery, people don't talk about migration. They pretty much start conversations during UAT. Okay, our system's good. Let's start.
Where are we going to get the data from? Let's go get it.
I know, right? And then you're like, okay, that's going to take me another 3 months to load all that data. I think it's very important, especially in the B2B context, right? Now that you have let's say, it could be in some sales guys, Excel. Every team
On his
could be
desktop.
managing their own Excel on their own desktop in their own different formats. So aligning them into a single format, getting that data loaded could be a huge challenge. Second one also, which I like to think about during the discovery phase, is integrations. You go, okay, I just need to connect to e-commerce, a ERP here, a DAM here, and maybe
marketplace here.
some reporting system. Yeah, how hard can it be? Like, I need to connect to 5 systems in real time. No, it's a huge challenge.
Oh my God.
Know, right?
That gives me heart palpitations just to think of it.
I know, I know. And I think that's what people just think that, okay, it's another platform. How hard can it be? Technology people can just put two wires together and everything starts to flow. I wish it was that easy, but it isn't. And data pipelines take time to set up, stabilize, build in a clean way. Because remember, like I was saying, that it's not the technology that's difficult anymore. It's more about aligning teams that together to say, okay, and if your middleware team is somebody, your PIM is somebody else, your e-commerce is somebody else. Now there's three people that need to come together to really define a pipeline that takes data from PIM into e-commerce, right? So instead of having stakeholders plus you as a business coming, defining this, trying to get a control of this, it's always nice the same partner that takes care of the integration as well as the PIM itself, but it can become like a pretty much a turnkey solution for you, right? So it simplifies life in that sense for you.
Yeah, I think the only exception I would say to that is if you've got an existing iPaaS system in your business, an integration platform as a service that's already connecting all of your other systems together, it's already connecting to your channels. In that scenario where you're effectively just adding one additional endpoint into the system stack, then I think leaving that
right.
either to your in-house
Absolutely.
iPaaS integration team or your existing SI or your existing integration partner, then that can speed things along significantly, especially if you've already got really solid integrations infrastructure in the business and really all we're doing is just plugging in one new system to the full stack. Then I can see some really big efficiencies in those scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. And but just to keep in mind, right, a lot of times people just estimate, they think that they have this amazing integration team that'll just pull and they don't budget enough hours, because in the end it's all down to budgeting, right? You need to budget time for that team to come in and do their piece, come in and understand the system, your data, out the mappings, and that is still time and effort that
Understand the
needs to be
API endpoints even,
good.
because we're talking about cloud native systems here, but still oftentimes your integration team is still going to need to review the API documentation. They're still going to have to set up their workflows. They're still going to have to set up the testing. They're still going to have to set up the specific calls that they're going to need to make. They're going to have to still set up the workflows in the integration middleware. So I've often found that integration can take longer and cost more than any one individual system implementation because it is that complex in many instances.
Exactly, exactly. And it's double the trouble for them, right? They have to understand the source, they have to understand the target, they have to fix out a mapping and then sort everything out and do it. In a small tip here, that one of the recommendations that we always go, and I remember that one customer we had this saying that would say smart endpoints and dumb pipelines. Would do is that we would not recommend doing any data transformations in the middle. Let the data pass in from a source field into target fields, but do not on the fly in the pipeline, because then nobody really is the key owner of that, right? It's like you're flying an international, or a ship is an international, it's stranded there. If you're stranded there, nobody's going to own you. So that's where you want to be. Pipeline just do the transfer, the changing of the formats and changing into how the other system needs the data, but don't actually change the data. Don't even create two fields to create something mashed up, because let the sources target system do it, because nobody is going to own that rule in the future. So that's one probably tip all towards integration.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is ETL, right? We don't want to do ETL in the middleware. We want to do ETL in the source or target systems. That's what we really want to do. Maybe just the L function can live in the middleware, which is the load function, right?
Yeah.
But as far as the ET, the extract and the transform, we really do not want to be doing all of that heavy lifting. And I guess another way of saying it is we do not want business logic to live in the middleware. We want the middleware to be the plumbing only wherever possible.
Exactly. There's always going to be exceptions in life, but that's the general practice or the general thumb of rule.
Absolutely. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think we've talked a lot about here. We've talked a lot about not having a change management strategy. We've talked about not having an integration strategy. We've talked about not having a good data migration strategy, trying to do too much in the MVP or the minimum viable product or the phase one deliverables. grossly underestimating the effort required for the initial rollout and how much internal resource is going to be needed inside the brand to be able to make this project a success. So I think we've covered some really good ground today. We've talked all about what are some of the implementation, adoption, and change management capabilities that are going to need to be in the business, and planning and process that are going to need to be in the business. And then we talked specifically about some of the post go live activities that are essential for long-term data governance and success. Having a data governance strategy, both passive and active, also investing a budget towards ongoing support and handholding and training. And that will usually equate to roughly 15 to 20% of your annual subscription in terms of maintenance and internal resources that will need to be applied to the system. So Marth, this has been a fantastic conversation once again. This is a great way to round up this 4-part series on PIM MDM for B2B businesses. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.